Hello and welcome to episode 94 of the Wisdom from the Akashic podcast. My name is Susie, I'm your host, and I'm an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner. Before I get started in today's episode, of course, I want to remind you all of the next free Akashic Records workshop, which you can sign up for in the show notes in the links below. I do these free workshops every couple of months just to give you all the opportunity to come and meet me online live, ask me some questions about the Akashic Records, and to learn more about the Akashic Records. So if you are interested in learning more and coming to meet me and asking me your questions, then make sure that you are signed up for that one. Today, I want to talk about the difference in the paths between the mystic and the occultist, and also what I see now more than anything, which is a path that is the combination of the two. So what I see in people's Akashic Records is lots of people will have had lifetimes where they have specifically focused on the path of the mystic, or they will have had lifetimes where they've focused specifically on the path of the occultist. So they may have both lifetimes of the mystic and lifetimes of the occultist. And in this incarnation, what I'm seeing is that there is this endeavor to merge the two. And the only person I've heard talk about this is a lady called Penny Frampton. And she refers to this path of the two as the path of the Arcanist. So that's the term that we're going to use today because I quite like it. The first thing to note before I get into what do these paths look like is that there is obviously going to be some overlapping and interconnection between these paths. Spiritual paths, whilst we're trying to put them into a linear definition and say, right, okay, this is this path and this is that path, that's in an ideal world that we can split it like that. In reality, there's a lot of interconnection and overlapping between them. But I think having the delineation can be helpful because it's going to help you understand perhaps what you've been drawn to in this lifetime and how your path is unfolding. And of course, it's going to help you understand when you come across different teachings, why certain teachings are really going to help you and resonate with you and expand you, and others you might not be so interested in. So let's start with this simple delineation, okay? So traditionally, the path of the mystic was the path of the heart. It was the path of love, and this is seen as the direct path, okay? So I'll pop a link in the show notes of an episode I did a while back on the direct and the indirect paths, but the mystical path is very much a direct path. And the idea behind the mystic path in terms of spiritual development is the eradication of anything that gives you a sense of separation. Okay, so divine union in the mystic path is the ultimate goal. And what you're doing is you're letting go of, you're surrendering anything that is keeping you stuck in this belief of separation or the energy of separation. That's the very simplistic overview of what would be traditionally seen as the path of the mystic. The path of the occultist, on the other hand, is somebody who really wants to understand spiritual phenomena or the supernatural. And they want to understand it not in an experiential way, such as the mystics. Okay, so yes, they're interested in experience like the mystics, but they also want to actually understand it in a more systematic way or a more scientific way. So the aim on the occultist path, and occultist just means hidden, remember, is to understand the cosmic laws and to bring these cosmic laws into the material plane. So it's working with spiritual phenomena and making changes in the physical reality. So it's studying systems, understanding how the world works and how the spiritual world works, and essentially bridging the two. Now, of course, on the occultist path, there is a further delineation between what is traditionally seen as the left and the right-hand paths, which we won't get into here today. But both the left and right-hand path are looking at working with these cosmic or spiritual laws and making changes on the material plane. The difference is purely the intention behind it. One is for the good of humanity and all. One is purely for egoic, selfish means. So on the occultist path, what you're going to do is you're going to find that you're drawn to studying systems. So you might be drawn to studying Kabbalah or the Hermetic laws or anthroposophy, understanding how the world, the cosmos, and we work as human beings and how we can affect a change. Now, the Arcanist, of course, is someone who merges the two. So the Arcanist is somebody who, yes, is interested in the experience of divine union that the mystical path offers, but they're also interested in studying those systems. And this is definitely what I see more of in this time, is that people are drawn to certain things based on their past lives and their experiences in different mystery schools and tradition, but ultimately they are dipping into both. And if you listen to my episode on the indirect and direct paths, you'll see that my understanding is that it's essential to have some indirect path work and experience before going into direct path practices for most people. There are certain people who direct path practices just are what's best for them straight away, but that is very rare. It's definitely more the case that people want to work through some stuff and then start to experience direct path practices. Now, if you want to dive into this topic further, a great discussion around the path of the mystic and the path of the occultist and how they show up in our lives is by Dion Fortune in a book from the 1930s called Training and Work of the Initiate. It's only a short little book, but she herself was a fascinating character, obviously controversial as all spiritual teachers are, but she gives a great delineation of these, how they show up within certain individuals. And she also notes, which I think is very important, that even if you're on the path of the occultist, so even if you are going through the study of those systems, the working with these supernatural forces to affect change in physical reality, that ultimately that path ends up on the path of the mystic. Ultimately, both paths go into this desire for the experience of, and the experience of divine union and the merging back with source. So I just want to offer you a couple of quotes from that book, because Dion Fortune goes into quite some detail about these two paths that open up for an initiate. And she states that the mystic aims at escaping the bondage of the flesh, never to return, whereas the occultist returns into the world of men equipped with the powers of the higher mind. So what she's saying here is that both paths are possible, but depending upon some internal factors is going to determine which of these paths is most appealing to someone who's going through esoteric training. And she further states that the mystic renders his personality negative in order that he may be a channel for cosmic forces, whereas the occultist deals with forms and uses his concrete mind. Okay, so we see here that there's this difference between the approaches in respect of your human self or your personal self. Now, Dion Fortune also points out that the mystic serves in one way, the occultist another, and really hammers home the point that both are necessary for evolution. She also goes on to state that the mystic is at one pole of the Christ force, the occultist is at the other, so that both are the Christ force, both are the Christ consciousness and expressions of the Christ consciousness, not that one is and one isn't. And she also talks about how the training offered at the level of the lesser mysteries to an initiate is going to be offered in the opposite direction of their natural inclinations. So somebody who is naturally drawn to the mystic path is going to be offered the lesser trainings in respect of the occultist path and vice versa. And then when you get into the stage of the greater mysteries, according to Dion Fortune, what happens is you're then able to follow that natural inclination. And this is to ensure balance. Okay, so balance between exposure to the mystic and the occultist path. And just to reiterate the point that both paths end in one place, the quote that Dion Fortune writes is that in the end, the occult path must terminate at the mystic goal. It has no end in itself. But as the mystic's way is steep and direct, so is the occultist circuitous at a gentler incline. So the mystic path is hard and it's a direct path, and it's going to mean getting rid of and surrendering all aspects of yourself. The occultist path is still going to get you there, but it's going to be at a gentler pace, and it's going to require sacrifice, absolutely, but not to the extent that the mystic path does, according to Dion Fortune. Now, just to finish off, Dion Fortune offers her classification of these paths, and she suggests that Buddhism and Christianity would be traditionally seen as mystic paths. Hinduism, Kabbalah, Theosophy, alchemy, and spiritualism would be seen as more occult paths. And for those of you who come across or like certain teachers' writings, there are famous mystics in both the Eastern and the Western traditions. So on the Eastern side, you have Rumi, Ramana Maharishi, Yogananda, Kabir, Hafiz. In the West, you would have figures such as Teresa of Avila, Meister Eckhart, St. Francis of Assisi. Okay, we most often see famous occultists on the Western traditions. Not to say that there aren't any in the Eastern traditions. I think we're just more familiar with the Western occultists here in the West. So Western teachers or teachings of that you might come across in your studies who would be classed as the more occultist paths would be Blavatsky, Crowley, Eliphas Levi, and John Dee. So whichever path you're drawn to, whichever teachings you're drawn to, both are part of the journey, and it's going to be a natural inclination for you. But do not be surprised if in this incarnation you're kind of dabbling in both. You're not really feeling called to one specific path or another, because this is what I see happening a lot, that you've had those lifetimes where you have just perhaps gone all in on the mystical path and the mystical trainings and teachings, and then you might have another life where you've gone all in on the occult path and trainings and teachings, and this lifetime is about balancing and merging the two within, which, as Dion Fortune states, is ultimately the way that it goes anyway. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this episode maybe gets you thinking about your own leanings, your own inclinations, and where you're at in your journey. Please don't ever feel like you need to change where you're feeling called to work with. My intention here is not to tell you to do that. It's to give you a place to put what you're currently naturally drawn into a little bit of a category, so you can understand that in yourself a little bit better, I hope. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next week for the next episode.